We are here with the infamous Dr. Duncan French. And I don't know how long.
Infamous?
Because this is the second attempt at this podcast. The first time we ended up blaming Dana White for shitty internet connection at the UFCPI. And
right.
You have to apologize for me because even the media room had shitty Wi-Fi, but it may have been my shitty Wi-Fi. That's not why everyone's tuned in. Dr. French, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Dre. Thank you so much. We're going to get there, I promise. At some point, this is going to happen. Hopefully, it's right now.
Well, if it fucks up again, we're going to pause it, and then we're just going to start again with new clothes. And you'll have more stubble here, and I'll have more beard. You know what I mean?
I was just about to say, the hairstyle will probably still be the same, though.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting less options, and you have none, right?
Exactly. Great to hear from you, mate.
Duncan, listen. So we have never had. I've known you for many years now, but you never get to sit down and have a conversation with someone quite like this. So how about we start with the potted version of Duncan French and who he is and where you are right now.
Yeah, obviously with the UFC Performance Institute, I'm the Vice President of Performance, based in Las Vegas. Yeah, there you go. Look at wearing the gear, the free stash. I love it. You know.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so having a great time over here. I've been with the UFC since April of 2017. So it's been an exciting journey to date, and long may it continue.
So, Dr. Duncan French, where did you go to school?
My PhD is from University of Connecticut.
Okay.
I actually started my PhD studies at Ball State University in Indiana because I worked with William Kramer, Dr. William Kramer, who is he was my professor, and then he actually transferred and took 7 of his grad students across to UConn with him. So from 2000 to 2001 I was at Ball State, and then 2001 to 2004 I was at UConn, and that's where I ultimately graduated from.
And where did you do your PhD in?
Exercise physiology. I'm largely a neuroendocrinologist, looking at, the hormonal interface with resistance training and exercise in general. The great thing about my PhD, which was fascinating at the time, was, I was part of a lab team, a pretty prolific lab group, so it wasn't like from day one, I just had a single stream of interest. The way Dr. Kramer ran his research group was we all took part in every single kind of funded research study that was taking place. So in all honesty, I've done everything from, working with NFL guys on, the early assessments of Under Armour compression garments back in, 2000 to 2001, through to putting topical ointments on 90-year-old nuns' wrists to see how it deals with osteoarthritis. So everything and in between, which was, I went there to work with him on hormones and resistance training, but actually on reflection, it was a great grounding in looking at, a spectrum of different things. And I look back and, I have fond memories because that was really, really valuable to have such a diverse insights to so many different types of projects we were running.
It's so important that people don't give it credit for. Like, if you want to learn one topic and you're interested in one topic, the smartest people who I know in one topic are broadly smart on various topics, and they know how to pull it together and bring it into the fold of what they're specialized in, if that makes sense. So when I have students, it's the same thing. It's like you're teaching stuff that they would think would be, when am I going to use this? It's not going to work, and blah, blah, blah. But when you build this kind of like broader foundation or lens that you can then use to focus on what you want to focus on, it always makes you more, it makes I don't know what it makes you make more interconnections between important facts that you might have overlooked before.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And on a personal level, philosophically, I mean, when I work with athletes and the way I go about athletic development is I want to give people the biggest encyclopedia of information, of physical or physiological information that they can then utilize. Now, they only might use chapter 2, 3, and 4 of this massive encyclopedia, but it just gives you a bigger vocabulary to then draw upon. So when you look at, what you're saying, when you get exposed to different paradigms and different areas of interest and different insights, you just lock that into the back of your mind, and you can always draw upon it as needed, experientially. And I think that's the way I try and go about working with athletes is, let's not sport specificity. Like everyone gets so wrapped up in specificity, but I think, you know, having general athleticism and a huge encyclopedia to draw on, as I would call it, and you know, that's my philosophical approach, rather than, you know, super specialism, and then they can take their skills wherever they can go, just more general skills, right?
Absolutely. And sports specialism, I don't even, human specializing first, right?
Exactly. And, you know, it comes down to biology and physiology 101 at the end of the day. Let's be honest. We're changing, we're changing tissue and nervous signals and signaling and this type of thing. So.
Okay, so now this is going to take me completely off course, because of course I want to talk about the work at the PI.
Right.
But feel free to go as deep as you want, like go back into your PhD work if you like, because I'm particularly interested. You said it's in neuroendocrinology, right? And of resistance training, which is funny enough. I'm in the midst of researching this topic right now for a separate reason, but I'm interested in your take on resistance training and specifically what the body is receiving from the training versus what we think we're giving the body. And what I mean by that is, with regards to resistance training, you're going to get endocrinological effects. So there's going to be an effect on the on your endocrine system. And it seems to me, at least, that a lot of people link those effects to particular movements that they do. So the deadlift, for example, because the deadlift requires such a large amount of tissue, you would say that the deadlift drives neuroendocrine effect. The bench press drives neuroendocrine effect. So it's almost like they couple the neuroendocrine effect that you're looking for with a particular exercise. Is that how the body sees it, or is it just stress? Does the body respond to stress, or does the body respond to the squats? And forget about the physiological tissues of the quads. I'm talking about the other body, not the meat wagon. I'm talking about the neural body that's controlling all of this, and how the endocrine system affects it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And that's ultimately why I call myself a neuroendocrinologist, because it's almost impossible to separate the two. We understand that there's androgen receptors on, neural axons and, neural tissue. So we can get, anabolic signals into the nervous system at very discrete points of interface and interaction. But as you use the word stress, and stress is a conscious, it's a conscious mechanism. And I think, linking the nervous, the consciousness of the stress of load, of force, of energy application, obviously then sets off a cascade of endocrine signaling that then leads either through, endocrine processes, which is obviously largely circular, versus autocrine, which is much more intricate at the point of tissue of the tissue. That interconnectivity between the nervous interpretation of what the stress or the load is, goes straight to the central parts of the brain, and your hypothalamic-pituitary axis then sets off that sympathetic drive, that sympathetic release of hormonal, the internal milieu of sympathetic hormones that then support, be it energy preservation, be it, neural tissue arousal, that then we know as endocrine interaction. So yeah, I would agree with you that it's very much, the nervous system and the endocrine system sit intimately with each other. It's hard to differentiate the two.
Because from my perspective, and of course, what I do because I've been at the PI teaching or doing seminars for a while now, but from my perspective, I often fight with people who insist on repeating the same exercises all the time, because exercises seem to have a life of their own, like the deadlift and the squat or Olympic lifting, such to the effect that people have this idea that they have to be doing those exercises. And what happens is that people get focused on what I call external exercises, like the bench press. And when I say external, I mean, when I say the word bench press, we're clearly, you and I are creating a conscious constraint to movement, because we want you to do something that as being the bench press. Does that make sense? So you might bench a little bit different than me, but generally when I say bench press, we have the same picture in our head. So there's an external constraint to the person's training. And then I'll often argue with people that if you continuously try to better yourself at the bench press, you're really only hitting the exact same line of tissue over and over and over and over, and you're fluctuating between high load, low load, high load, I got injured, low load again, fluctuate back to high load. And if you're running the same lines, of course, connective tissue cannot adapt indefinitely, so you end up getting to a point where the tissue yields, okay? That's a long way to get at my point, but the point being is that, I've always said, that it's not the exercise you're doing, it's the effort you're putting in that gets you the endocrine response that we want. And I think that's that. So would you say I'm correct in that?
I mean, you hit on 2 points. Number one is something we've previously just discussed in terms of reductionism. And I think in science, when we look at science, it's a world of reductionism. It's a world of trying to get to the minutiae of what is going on biologically or physiologically. I think one of the fascinating things when I first spoke to you and sat in the course is this systemic approach of how you look at connective tissue and modifying movement, right? And I think, that really resonated with me, because there's a time to be a reductionist, but there's also a global holistic system of interaction that is just the human organism. So that resonates with me. And then the other part of it is what my PhD was actually on, was looking at repeat exposure to force. So we did a pretty aggressive squat protocol, and we exposed athletes to it again and again and again to look at what the sympathetic response was. So to look at epinephrine and norepinephrine, like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and how that then signaled testosterone release, the anabolic cascade that comes from epinephrine release, and then creating an anabolic environment that then promotes attachment of the testosterone to the nervous system, and then you can potentiate the neural signal. Okay. So that's kind of what my whole PhD was about. And what we found was the repeat exposure across time actually blunts that response. You become, the arousal gets suppressed. You get used to the exposure, the terror, or the I'm going in to do this 6x10, 80% is like I know what that feels like now. My arousal prior to that workout actually gets suppressed. So coming back to your point, yes, if you continually expose the body to the same exercise, let's say, your body, as it should, that's what the body does, it adapts to the overload, and now the overload is reduced, and you're no longer getting the physiological response. And that's the key to training, and the strategy of training is that you've got to continually change the stimulus. You've got to continually trick the body or make the body guess so that it responds. And I think, like I say, 2 key points. Let's not always look in a reductionist fashion. Mm-hmm. And from my work in my PhD, understanding that the body adapts pretty quickly. So within 2 to 3 workouts of a very strenuous session, we saw the biokinetics of of a group of well-trained individuals completely changed to the same stimulus, the same response. So if that's the case, you've got to then chase a new stimulus to re-potentiate the whole process.
So you were referring to what I would refer to as accommodation, which
absolutely,
really, yeah, which really means that your body is trying. See, your body's lazy as shit, right? Your body doesn't want to fucking spend energy it doesn't want to spend. So it's trying to find ways to make whatever you give it easier, right? Yeah. And when people get better at bench press, I got stronger. No, you got easier. You know what I mean? It got easier, but it's not necessarily that you accommodated to the exercise. I say this about swimming, right? It's like swimming's the best cardiovascular exercise when you don't know what the hell you're doing. But as soon as you know how to swim, you're literally learning to accommodate to the water such that you preserve energy.
You're trying to be as efficient as possible. That's the whole point of swimming.
Yeah, and you see how the confusion gets it, because it's like, well, I have to deadlift. Well, no, you really don't have to deadlift. You have to stress large amounts of tissue. Mm-hmm. I would argue specifically for whatever it is that you do, and then you have to also try to get these neuroendocrine responses. So you have to care for, it's all the same stuff, but you care for it on both sides. But that's fascinating, because for people listening to understand what we're saying is I'll call this reaching the Hayflick limit, right? So the Hayflick limit is like all somatic cells have a number of times that they can replicate properly, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. And if you continue to run that same line with the same amount of information, you run down that Hayflick limit. So that line of tissue is going to yield, right? That's why you have to learn to distribute the load amongst other tissues.
Yeah.
You can't just specialize in the damn bench press, is what I keep telling people, right? And you're saying it responds the same way in terms of the neurological effect, because even psychologically, when you're used to doing it, that dampens the fear stress response, and we kind of want that.
Yeah, exactly. And at that point, that's the time to reevaluate your training. That's periodization, let's call it. But that's progressive overload. It's the super compensation cycle that we're all aware of, training 101, right? Yeah. As you create the alarm and the rebound becomes less. We've got to create a different alarm system. So yeah, I agree with you. And I think the other thing is that, we've got to understand that the environment, whilst we're targeting tissue adaptation, the environment is a crucial part of that, be it anabolic or be it metabolic, endocrine or metabolic, or neural. We're not just targeting muscle tissue or fascia in your case, or connective tissue. Sure. The environment, the surrounding environment, is going to support or attenuate the adaptation process, let's say. And that's where I come at it from a kind of neuroendocrinologist, but someone that is into, resistance training and strength training historically. It's kind of a light bulb moment. Yes, we can target tissue, but we can also target that tissue, but create an external environment around that tissue that is also going to super compensate it even more.
Exactly. It's how you pick your inputs, and then how the inputs are applied. You can drive different effects neurologically, endocrinologically, you know the word.
Endocrinologically.
Aerobically, anaerobically. It's all about, but load is load, which is what I find is amazing, especially to the body. Because I always say, the nervous system grows its meat. It's like if you think about this from the beginning, the nervous system comes online and it's like, oh my God, I can take in information and I have this brain thing to process it. And then it's like, okay, but there's so much information coming in. How do I funnel this information? Well, the answer is to grow meat, right? Yeah. So your ectoderm, it grows mesoderm, and then it's completely connected. It's like your meat is the cilia that your nervous system uses to learn about its environment. And then you have this endocrine system working in the background with your nervous system. But those two things are for the same purpose. It's for the goals of the brain, the central nervous system, and the meat is the meat, right?
Yeah, and here's the paradox, right?
Yeah.
The more you send a specific signal, the more that meat is going to become thicker and thicker and thicker, and you're really laying down that neural signal. But when we talk about athletic diversity and overload, if we just lie down on this one pathway of neural signaling, we're negating the development of all the other components. And that's the paradox that we're playing with. How much do I really target and stress a particular adaptation versus getting too chaotic that when, on the other side of the fence, if you're just too chaotic, that the signal is too dilute, that you don't actually lay this meat down. So that's a real paradox, I think, in training that we're always playing with. How much do we get specific, and how long is that deadlift going to happen for versus when do I change it, and when is the appropriate time, and what's the accommodation factor in part one to then make part two happen, So I think that's an interesting component to training.
It's not done well, and you can tell it's not done well because the overuse injuries are so predictable. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean, for particular sports.
Oh yeah.
It's the same.
And it's hard to like there's no hard or fast answer as well. Your physiology, my physiology, that same exposure is going to be completely different. I always say this, you can have a team of 15 basketball players and give them the same workout. It's going to be 15 different responses to the same workout. Yeah. So understanding that is the challenge that we're presented with, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of individual sport, athlete sports. Actually, I'm only a fan of combat sports.
All right.
If you want to write this down, why did Dre become a sports specialist? I love baseball because of the study of the physiology of what's happening and the neurology in the athlete. I don't particularly like to watch a game of baseball, if that makes sense. I don't remember where I was going with this, but does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have more interest in the athlete themselves. So I was going to say, whenever people ask me, it's like, do you like this group training or that group training? Or for my sake, it's like, should I go to kin stretch or should I work with someone specifically? Well, the answer is always, if you can work with someone specifically for the reason you just gave. It's like, no matter how good group training is, it's never as good as individual training. If we don't agree to that, then we have to agree that all assessment protocols that we use are useless because it doesn't matter anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But,
yeah, I like your perspective on it, but I agree with you. I agree, and I think that that's the liberty that I have in our team have right now. We work in an individual sport, right? We work with individual fighters, and in previous lives, I was in the English Premier League, and I've got 35 soccer players, and you've got to get them all through a workout. You've got to develop them, but it's a challenge,
Mm-hmm.
and then I go to Notre Dame and you got 106 football players, and you're like, okay, this is an interesting challenge, but you've basically got to accept that you're not optimizing every single organism then, right? Every single person is not getting optimized. So
okay, but this is so interesting, Duncan. I got to stay on it now. So yes, but would you say, because it just came to me as well, again, would you say that from a systems perspective, okay, if you take a group of soccer players, you'd be confident that you were driving particular systems so that you would improve the person, their aerobic system, their anaerobic system, neurologic drive, endocrine output. Those ones seem more general.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? Like, it seems to me if you give me 100 people, I can train you aerobically. Oh, you got a person in the background.
Streaker. There's a streaker. That's Alfie French, my 3-year-old. That's the joys of working from home.
Where was I? That was the most interrupted I've ever been on a
Sorry, you're general systems.
But I mean, but then it comes down to when you're dealing with the meat is different, right? Like the meat, let's take a fighter that I know that like Ngannou or something. If Ngannou has, a right glenohumeral joint problem, then those inputs cannot be, let's just generally stimulate the system. It has to be right glenohumeral joint stimulation, very specific. So it's like the meat is the specificity of the training, and then the systems just have to be driven. Yeah. And then it can be driven specific to what we do. I just had a conversation with Corey Peacock. I know you know Corey. And
good friend of mine.
Yeah, and we were talking about something similar, right? Like he was saying that for his fighters, he's really just taking them and then making sure that their systems are optimized to output fight night.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I seem to always responding with a double-edged kind of response, but
they all are, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're optimizing systems, then you're dealing with someone's genetic potential, right? Everyone has a bucket, right? How big is your bucket, and how high are we filling the bucket? Are we filling it to the top, or is it 80% full? Excuse me. So if we put a team of soccer players through a workout that is targeted at, glycolytic capacity, then some of those guys are going to fill their genetic potential to 60%, some might be 80%, and some might be maxed out on the stimulus that you give them at that moment in time. That's optimization of systems, as you would call it, and I would call it, right, how big's your genetic bucket, and how close is my training program getting to optimizing or maximizing your potential. On the flip side of it, what you do in your world is look at like what I would call contraindications, essentially. Where is someone compromised against this genetic bucket? And that's your Ngannou example, where, okay, that's a very specific thing that you've got to get with that individual and understand why his genetic bucket might not be filling to 100%. What are the restrictions? What's the limitations that's capping him at 75%? Now, if I go and look into that individual athlete, you might identify 1, 2, 3 different things that if we correct those things, now the potential for the genetic bucket to go from 75 to 95% is increased. And these two things that for me are completely interrelated, but a very different strategy. One is very much an individual approach, and one is, it's a systems response. It's optimizing systems. And like I said, I keep saying it, sometimes we get ahead of ourselves and make things really complex. We know how to change muscle physiology. We know how to change aerobic physiology. We know how to change alactic physiology. Like that's been done for years and years and years. So that we kind of know that. that's hard to mess up somewhat. Yeah, we get clever and we play around with just programming strategies, but you know, the 101 of it is pretty well defined. Yeah. But this piece over here, I think that's the true specialist piece where you're breaking down individual contraindications or where an athlete is compromised on their ability to have their genetic potential maximized.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that makes sense. There's a lot of maximized and compromised there, but that's kind of how I look at it.
I'm still interested in talking. So whatever you said was clearly something there. If we rewind it, something was intelligent. No, I'm just, that's great. But you know what? It's another point that we bring up is that you've dealt with a lot of high level athletes your whole life, I'm assuming. And now you're in this scenario where you're given people who are just playing out what they were destined to do. Right. And then there's a discussion about the potential to change that destiny, but how much of it, like, let's take a fighter, any fighter you can. We were talking about Usman. I was talking about that. Mm-hmm. I mean,
he's pretty good.
He's all right, right? I mean, as far as fighters go,
he's pretty good.
You know, he'd give you a problem.
Yeah, he makes Corey look good.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Or Ngannou, or like, how much of it is you're just getting their body out of their way, and how much of it is what they're doing, like what the training is? You know what I mean? Like, is it the workouts that we're doing, or are we just trying to get out of their way to let their genetics show? And the reason I ask this is because there's a lot of influence now on social media with outliers. And I think it's really fucking dangerous to, you know, you'll have a Navy SEAL or someone who's just like clearly an outlier as it is, giving advice to look past your injuries. And if your ankle hurts fucking good, fuck your ankle, chop it off and keep going. And then people have this, because I always say I've had the pleasure of dealing with athletes to the pro level for a long time now too.
Yeah.
And they're not there necessarily because what they did was the smartest sequences of events. They're there because they should be there for the most.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, they're there despite us, not because of us, right? And
if anything, there's people that survive the shit we put them through, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I always say, you know, like I liken it to, you know, a stallion, right? You're trying to get a Mustang, like the most purebred Mustang out on the plains. You know, you don't want to take the wild out of the Mustang. That's a special animal. That's a special beast, right? But we know that we can throw a saddle on a Mustang and train it to, you know, to do particular things, but it's still a purebred Mustang, right? And I think athletes are like that. You know, I'm flipping and saying despite us rather than because of us, but, you know, I think, you know, these people are, you know, high-level athletes have got not only a mindset that is different to, you know, the most of the people, but a physiological makeup that allows them to have a durability to go through the rigors of whether it's good or bad training exposure and still rise and still maximize that genetic bucket that I was talking about. Do you know what I mean? And I think, yeah, it is fascinating because I think, you know, particularly in the world of S&C, we can, you know, there's a lot of rah-rah and bigging ourselves up. And, you know, let's just take a step back and really figure out the contribution that we're making here. It's a critical contribution, but these individuals are special individuals anyway.
Oh yeah, it's an incredible contribution. By no means do I want to downplay it, because when you're talking with, you know, two stallions, it's, you know, who has that little bit more. So I mean, right. At that level, yeah. It's so necessary. It's crazy, and it's probably not given enough credit. But if you scale that out to people getting advice, you know what I mean?
Yeah, in the sport that I'm in right now, and, you know, there's no disrespect to anyone. I love our guys, but, you know, I think in combat sports in general, not just MMA, there's almost an endemic of overtraining. And that is the issue of the warrior spirit, right? So, you know, the warrior spirit is critical to what our athletes are, our fighters, that's why they're so good at what they do. They will run through a brick wall, whereas a normal person will not. You know, they'll go to some deep, deep, dark places. But that can, if that's inappropriately managed, that's going to get in their way, right? So, you know, often our role is to pull the horses back a little bit, is to just formulate a better approach, a better strategy. We don't want to dilute any of that desire, any of that spirit, any of that internal intrinsic motivation that makes them so special to go into those deep places. We've just got to do it in the right order, the right structure, the right fashion, the right distribution across time, the right progression. And I think that's what our role is a lot of the time. And I think I see that, you know, I see that more in our domain right now than, say, you know, my time with basketball or soccer or rugby or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, so you're holding back the reins where necessary because they will drive through.
Absolutely. I mean, they're going to redline every session as much as they can. It's a fight, right? Everything in fighters fight. That's what they do. So if you give them a workout, they're going to win and fight that workout. If you give them a sparring session, they're going to win that sparring session. If you give them a technical drilling, the technical drilling is still going to be, you know, they're going to try and win that battle. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is that they often, and it's not, I don't want to say that this is a bad thing, right? But we just got to channel it, I think, in our sport.
It just has to be, it has to be funneled. It has to be managed.
Right.
I guess brings us to the next point, or the next thing I was going to talk about you for the beginning of this is the UFCPI.
Right.
Now, that would be the idea, is that you're trying to, you know, build trust. That's what I was going to get at. It'd be so important in that case, when you're dealing with a fighter who's, the result of their sport is not the same as the result of a basketball game. We can agree, right? So like you said, if you get a guy who's already, or a girl who's already in their brain, they're genetically a fighter, they want to fight, and their sport involves them protecting their life, not only their livelihood.
Consequences are pretty big. The
consequences are pretty damn big, right? So they would really have to trust you to tell them to back away. Right. And even more than other athletes, like you really do. I've dealt with a lot of team athletes, and I got to be honest, these are amazing. I'm not insulting professional team athlete, but individual athletes, I think they inherently have I'm in this, they're in this alone, no matter, you know, what happens. So there is no pause or relaxation or off season, or I'll just let myself put on 10 pounds here or there. It does, especially now in UFC, I notice everyone's ready all the time.
Yeah.
Right. This is not like BJ Penn, right? BJ, you know, weight goes on, weight comes off, weight goes on, weight, the olden days. It's not like that anymore, right?
Yeah.
So I was getting at a question there. So what I was going to say is, without trust in your knowledge, it must be impossible to hold back on the reins.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. And you know, if you're the 8th man on a basketball team, you can probably hide and have a night off, right? And get by. But there's no hiding in the octagon. It's one of one, right? And if you're successful, it's because of you. And if you fail, it's because of you. So you're absolutely right. Like building a relationship, number one, but then a confidence of the athlete to say, hey, these guys have got my best interest at heart. They know what they're talking about, or they're trying to improve me and support my progress. Giving up that, like taking down those barriers and giving up that much control, let's say, is something that is really challenging for individual fighters. But that's what we're trying to do, is, you know, we know we don't have all the answers. And I think, you know, this is a partnership. We're a stakeholder in their success, and that's how we want to message it. But we also want to demonstrate our awareness, our insights. You know, I think what we try to do, and Forrest Griffin, my colleague, says this the best, you know, that we've got great technical knowledge in combat sports, in MMA. And what we have at the PI is great expertise in supplementary services, you know, physiology, sports science, medical, strength and conditioning, nutrition, whatever. And what we're trying to do is marry these two and bring these two together. Now that, you know, some marriages work well and some marriages are rocky, you know, and we've got to work through that. But bringing the technical expertise and this supplementary expertise together is what professional athletics is in other sports in this day and age. And I think that's where combat sport is very granular, you know, and its evolution has been a little bit slower. and we're trying to professionalize the outset, the perspective on how athletes go about their preparation, their recovery, their competition, et cetera, et cetera. That's our mandate.
And I would agree that I would think you would agree that education of the fighters is key, right? Mm-hmm. Education, and then outcomes.
Not just the fighters, of their coaches as well. Anyone that is a stakeholder. You talk about Corey Peacock, right? Corey is a stakeholder in Usman's performance, as is Henry Hoof, his coach, and he's at Elevate right now. Okay, but anyone that's got an input with a fighter, we want to engage with the whole team. If we just talk to the fighter about process and methodology, and then they go back to a gym where a coach doesn't really believe in what we're doing, it's contradictory. And then they're going to lean with their coach. They're going to lean with their support team. What we do at the Performance Institute is we want to engage with anybody that is surrounding the athlete and working with that athlete.
And for people listening, if you've never been involved in combat sports, I can't tell you how quickly a sensei or instructor becomes a expert master PhD physiologist in exercise and specializing in ointments and how to fix and distribute load. And you know what? And it's not an insult, because I've been with so many instructors right now. And when you're in the trenches with someone training combat sport, you can't help but trust people in a way that you can't get in any other way. You know what I mean? Yeah, so when your instructor says something, whether or not you believe it or not, you're going to shut the fuck up and you're going to do it right there and then worry about it later. Now, you're doing jiu-jitsu right now, right?
Yeah, look, my face is all mashed up from this morning. I was looking at my video here.
So you can attest to that. Like, sometimes the person asks you to do something, and then you're like, it's usually during the warm-up or and then you're like, oh, fuck, from an exercise physiological standpoint, this doesn't make any
sense. Makes no sense. Yeah. No,
I go to the website before you start. I don't know if you've done this yet, where they try to exhaust the shit out of your neural system. Like, they just redline it, so that you can get used to fighting tired.
That's the classic. That's not just combat sport. I mean, football does that every day.
Right? Yeah. So how do you I guess that's like we were saying, you have to get in on a number of different people. And the PI is particularly important because when you have a smaller fight camp, you don't have the metrics. You don't have the outcome measures, right? And I'm one for be basic, and your training should be basic. But with these athletes, it's how many parts of their system are you tracking? And that the PI, is from what I've been introduced and taught, you're tracking everything that is trackable, right?
Well, the first thing I would say is it's an Alaka approach, right? So we look at every fighter and every team on an individual basis. Now, some fighters want to engage with us 100% in everything we would do. And as you say, then we're going to wrap them in diagnostics and objective assessment so that we can be super intentional, coming back to some of our earlier discussions, about what is it that you need to improve on? What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And then we can get into the conversation. Are we maximizing your strengths, or are we targeting a weakness to lift your lowest limitation? And then that's going to drive your development, So some fighters will engage with it completely. Other fighters are going to say, hey, I just want to cherry pick off this menu of what the Performance Institute can offer, what a nutritional support, because I'm cool with my strength coach. I'm cool with my technical work. Everything else is good. I feel healthy, but, I just want to sort out my weight management or my weight descent. And they can a la carte pick that piece. But what I would say is that at the heart of what we do at the Institute is objective insight. And I always say, if you're not assessing, you're guessing. So when we're dealing with trying to make world champions, it's hard to be a world championship by just, by good luck and guessing, right? I think the best champions are strategic in their approach. They understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. They need to target specific things. They need to develop technically or physiologically or physically in certain areas, or mentally in certain areas. And then they go after that and they improve. And that's what we offer with our assessment and our diagnostic, or let's just say our objective approach to service delivery in all of our technical areas.
So, and the original purpose for this, like, as a business, let's just talk about that. Why are we doing this? There's nowhere else that this is done in a professional sports setting that I know of, or maybe it is, and I'm just
No, I mean, at the end of the day, it's assets, right? It's protecting and looking after your assets. And the unique thing about the UFC as a, let's call them a league, which is what they are, right? You know, that we work with independent contractors. So the fighters, we don't own the rights to the fighters like the New York Yankees would own the rights to all of their players. But we've still got a vested interest in putting the best fights on and making sure our best talent get into the octagon and the best fights occur. You know, people aren't missing weight or championship fights don't drop off because of injuries, etc. There's a financial implication of a world title fight dropping off a fight card. So, you know, the UFC and God bless them, like, had the foresight to say, all right, we as a league are going to invest in our assets and provide this, you know, this infrastructure, this service to them, free of charge if they're on our roster, to protect them and to maximize their potential to put on a great show for an audience. And if the show is fantastic and exciting and the best fighters are fighting, then, you know, we're going to have more people tuning into what is our great sport. And I think that's that's what the Performance Institute is about.
That's brilliant. And so what is going on at the Institute now? A few times ago, we were speaking before you guys went into China,
right?
And then that opened. How's it out there right now?
Well, I mean, China's been an interesting one for obvious reasons in this time. But we are open again on August 3rd. We opened up and we have a 95,000 square foot facility with a full-time academy in China. So those fighters are back in full-time training now. And prior to COVID, we were open kind of 6-7 months, and our fight record was like 33-3. So we would, the guys were smashing it over there. And again, that's more of a talent pathway into what we would call the big UFC. Those guys aren't currently in the UFC, and we're trying to do talent development in a geographical region where we think, you know, obviously there's mass appeal for working in China from a commercial perspective, but also that's a rich history of martial arts that is not necessarily MMA. It's things like Sanda or, you know, judo or karate. And it's like, okay, can we transfer some of those guys into our sport? So yeah, China's happening. Vegas is up and running again, and all the events I'm sure people are seeing. The UFC is running events every weekend now, which is kind of crazy for us because we've moved to more of an event support model as well. So we're not just a transient facility in Vegas. We're supporting every single event with medical and nutrition support to help the fighters with those critical pieces as they prepare for what is the most important thing, i.e. competition. But we're expanding a big, we're bringing online a big digital platform here soon. Again, I think in the first 3 years of our existence, we've been very much about like tweaking and tailoring our operations. You know, what does it need to be for our support, for our clients, i.e. the fighters and the coaches? Now what we want to do for the next 3 years is really start opening up the doors from an education and outreach perspective. So we're going to be bringing on a lot more kind of digital interaction. We want to build a global community of people that have got a vested interest in working with combat athletes, so we can essentially elevate and just rise the best practice, and we get a ripple effect around the world. That's our our ambition. So we want to build that global community, want to get access for people externally to our expertise, our staff. We're looking at certification and accreditation structures. Again, trying to drive best practice so fighters can make good informed choices of who they can work with and who's been essentially defined as a good practitioner. So yeah, we've got lots of ambition, and then more specific project work on some key areas like heat acclimation for weight cutting, or looking at instrumented mouthpieces for monitoring head impacts and workloads and those types of things. We're getting into some cool stuff as well. So
wow, that stuff's really interesting. That's funny. I was talking to Forrest about that last time I was there, and it was the whole, like, when the PI came, you guys went through like many years of research. Like, it was like you were running, but it was you were trying to amalgamate, trying to grab the best things that you could for a variety of different things that you would need to create a champion fighter. So it was a lot of like research and development for the first few years. But there's nothing stagnant about the UFC. Like, once that point is hit, it's bringing everyone up to speed, and now you guys are elevating even past, and you guys are in research things now, and you guys are doing like seminars, and I know
yeah.
Rules.
I mean, it's, you know, it's hard to swing your dick 3 months into a new project and say you're the man, right? And that's not what we were about. So we deliberately kind of just kept our heads down, and just started accruing information and learning what our population of athletes are about, you know, just trying so we can create those population norms and those distributions within different assessments and different diagnostics, so that we can give our athletes better information. You know, we're not going to give them the specific results of athlete X, Y, or Z. But what we can say is, hey, you're a 185 middleweight, and here's the norm values for the middleweight division. Here's the distribution curve. Like, you sit below the average, above the average. Now we can have a conversation. Well, I'm not really bothered if I'm sitting below the average, because my skill over here or this quality is so much better than the rest of the division. So I'm prepared to leave that. Or, all right, that's a limitation. I can now target it. I know that I've got issues. That helps a lot with guys that are deciding which weight class to sit in as well, when they're looking at strength, power, fit, conditioning. Should I move up? Should I move down? We can compare them and give them way more insight to what they would have had historically to make a more informed choice. But yeah, the UFC is a pretty dynamic company. You know, it's a great company to work with, and it's obviously driven by Dana at the helm, and just his vision and his innovation and his mindset. But the Performance Institute, what we try to do, we don't stand still. And again, we want to continue to turn over new stones, figure out how we can help our fighters more. And as I say, moving forwards, do a better job of communicating to the global community that have an interest, not only in combat sports, but human performance in general, and really just elevate the conversation.
Brilliant. So, do you make fight predictions, or you're not one of those guys?
I mean, it depends, because we're agnostic to the whole roster, right? So I've got to kind of sit on the fence. I want it to be a good fight.
Yeah, that's what.
Because we might have worked with both fighters, and that's the unique thing about the PI as well, you know?
Yeah, well, we're doing this on the Friday. It's Friday today, right?
Correct, yeah. And the biggest world title fight in history tomorrow.
Dude, I mean, you know what? Did you see the picture? I can't explain how big some of these guys are, like Stipe, but if you saw the last picture that he was hitting mitts with his coach. Who's his coach name? Is slipping my mind, from Strong Style there.
Yeah.
He was hit. The guy looks like he looks like a giant from Lord of the fucking Rings. Like
he's I would say farmer strength, right? He's just a beast of a guy.
Yeah, like, fucking head, like fight mind, and his fists are. Who's the most like standout athlete? Like, if you had to pick one that you've worked with at the PI, and you don't have to pick favorites, but just in terms of that thing that we were talking about with the genetics, like the holy shit genetics.
I mean, the holy shit genetics of Francis Ngannou, like, hands down.
I thought
like, that guy's like a Greek god. The irony was, when Francis first, when the PI first opened, Francis was a project that was kind of sent by Dana, and his strength and his power levels were like that of a 155er. He's obviously worked on that now, but if you look at the guy, he's like a freaking Greek god. You know what I mean? It's unbelievable genetics. He could be a defensive end in the NFL. He could be a post player in the NBA. He could be a professional boxer if he wanted. He could do anything, that guy. He's amazing.
Inordinately. Yeah, I ran into him the last time we were there. He walked by. I was like, holy, just a fucking present. And then lucky enough, the winner of the weekend, well, I guess if it's Cormier, he's one and done now, right? That'd be it for him.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
If you're Stipe, then you're lucky enough to run into him again soon.
Yeah. The result of winning the world title again is you get to fight Francis one more time. So
yay! Okay, sir. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I gotta tell you, I appreciate it. I know we went off into, arguably, I thought it was more interesting, but I did not know. I did not know. I knew you, right? We worked together and all this stuff, but I didn't know your educational background, which places you at a very specific, like, if you think about who to hire and how to hire, Dana White does it well, right? For that reason, being a neuroendocrine person at the helm of managing these types of athletes is exactly who you want, kind of pulling the strings. It's phenomenal.
Well, I appreciate you.
Was that?
I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. I mean, I've got a great team around me that, you know, I always say there's levels to sport, right? There's definitely levels in MMA, but I think there's levels in sports performance as well. And, you know, I put our team up against anybody. We've got some great people at the Performance Institute doing great things. So, yeah, I'm excited just to be able to drive that ship a little bit and, you know, just we're having fun and we're enjoying it. And hopefully the fighters are seeing the benefit of what we do for them.
Yeah, and you know, shout out to Bo. Bo is training there still, and Heather with the physical therapy. Shout out to them and big what's up. You know, first time I was there, I met Dan Ige.
Yeah.
And he was at the seminar, and we worked with him.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
Dude, now that's all I gotta say. That guy, he looks so much better, man.
Oh yeah, I mean his last fight versus Calvin Kattar was, you know, that was a battle, man. But Dan's a warrior, and yeah, he's another great guy who tries to do things right, buys into monitoring and assessment, so he can. It means he can make better decisions about how to look after himself, and that's all we're trying to do. Yeah, Uriah Hall has got you know, a big fight coming up. He was at that seminar that you did the first time around. So
I love it. I love the fighters. I love fighters. They want to know for them. You know what I mean? And we'll get into that topic later about their drive. We'll talk about it another time. How about that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Very good, my friend. Thank you so much. We're gonna do it soon again. Anything you want to shout out to, or how we find more about you?
Yeah, no, like I say, I appreciate the platform and chatting. It's been fantastic to reconnect. I'm on all the social channels. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Dr._Duncan_French most of the time, I believe. So, yeah, if anybody wants to reach out, I try to be accessible. And, yeah, I'm just doing my thing, and hopefully it helps people. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Big hug, my friend.
All right. Thanks,
We'll talk again soon.
Yeah. Take care. Appreciate it.